If you think the dinosaurs vanished in a single heartbeat, the truth is stranger and darker. The asteroid didn't just end an era, it rewired the planet in a way that let only a specific kind of survivor crawl out the other side. The real question isn't whether dinosaurs died, it's how long their last shadows lingered after the sky itself turned into an enemy. 66 million years ago, a rock the size of a mountain struck the Yucatan with such speed that physics stopped feeling real. The energy release was beyond anything living creatures had evolved to understand. Close to the impact, time compressed into pure violence. Shockwaves, walls of air, water turning vertical, and ground that behaved more like liquid than stone. Farther away, things didn't look survivable either. Debris shot into space and came roaring back, turning the atmosphere into a broiler. Forests everywhere lit up, not as isolated fires, but as a global burn scar, planet-scale kindling, snapping to flame. So did every dinosaur die in the first hour? Not exactly. Geography and luck carved out temporary pockets of mercy. Low, wet marshes where heat couldn't penetrate as efficiently. Dense forests with humidity heavy enough to blunt the worst. High latitudes where the blow arrived as a delayed echo. The refugee wasn't kind, but it existed. Think of small dinosaurs or juveniles tucked into overgrown thickets that steam instead of ignite. For a moment, survival was still on the table. Then the sky changed its mind. When sunlight becomes a rumor, everything that depends on it starts to fail. The ejecta that ignited those fires also shot soot and aerosols high enough to blanket the planet. Photosynthesis didn't just slow. In some models, it flatlined for months and stayed strangled for a decade or more. Temperatures dropped fast and the darkness stretched. Picture a world where noon feels like a tired evening and nights come with sharp, indifferent cold. That's the setting for the last pages of the dinosaur story. At first, the winners seemed obvious: carnivores. The world briefly became a buffet of carcasses, but that logic has an expiration date. Once the herbivores, already starving, fell, the carnivores that depended on them started losing the thread too. The earliest survivors weren't the biggest, or the strongest, or the fiercest. They were the ones built for low budgets. Small creatures that could hoard warmth, eat almost anything, and hide in wet mud or under roots. Burrowers that could ride out the thermal shock. Semi-aquatic forms that could slip into water where temperatures swung less wildly. When the ceiling fell on the food web, the victors were the misers. And yet, even with that clear logic, the clock on dinosaur survival isn't clean. The old documentary tagline, "The day the dinosaurs died," sounds decisive, but the fossil record loves to whisper, not shout. In places like the Hell Creek Formation, dinosaur bones lie right up to the iridium-rich boundary clay, the sudden chemical fingerprint of the impact. Put your finger on that razor-thin layer, and you're touching a planet mid-change. Below, tyrannosaurs, ceratopsians, hadrosaur herds. Above, the long aftershock where birds and mammals begin to build a different world. That's the clear, global story. Still, under the hood, there's wiggle room. Some researchers ran climate and light-blocking simulations and argued photosynthesis could have been fully stalled for months, then severely limited for around 15 years. In a world running on empty, that's enough time for a brutal, slow fade. You can imagine pockets of small dinosaurs hanging on in dim, cold landscapes, scavenging, eking out scraps of understory that survived in protected microclimates. Years pass. Each winter cuts deeper. Every season, fewer eggs hatch and fewer juveniles make it to adulthood. It doesn't take a million years to erase a lineage when your entire energy economy is broken. Sometimes a few decades of bad luck is sufficient. Other estimates push toward the short side. Weeks to months before survivors lose their food base completely. A handful of years at most. It's a different kind of tragedy. Instead of a prolonged decline, It's a staggered collapse, like lights going out room by room across a city until the whole skyline is dark. And then there's the camp that loves a long tale, thousands of years, even into the Paleocene. That's where the San Juan Basin claims come in. In a remote stretch of the Colorado-New Mexico borderlands, some teams reported bones of hadrosaurs and tyrannosaurids in rocks mapped as Paleocene, layers that should be younger than the impact. If true, that would mean dinosaurs didn't just flinch, they endured. Maybe not everywhere, but in a few stubborn refugees that functioned like time capsules, canyons that sheltered them from the initial firestorm, or high-latitude populations that drifted south, tracking slivers of climate they could still handle. One especially bold idea: eggs, not adults, survived. Tiny, insulated, tucked into nests built before the sky fell. After the worst passed, the eggs hatched, and a thread of dinosaurs kept going. It's an electrifying story, until you run into the counter-argument that most experts find hard to ignore. Reworking. Fossils don't come with timestamps etched into the bone. They can erode from older layers, get tumbled by rivers, and wind up entombed in younger sediments. To a trained eye, the grains in the matrix, the wear on the bone, the way multiple bones sit together, all of it adds up to either a case for a fossil dying where it's found, or a fossil traveling there after death. The critics say those Paleocene dinosaurs are a mirage created by time's conveyor belt. And in most circles, that verdict stands. Impressive claims, insufficient proof. If a true Paleocene dinosaur community existed, we still haven't caught it in a way that convinces the majority. So where does that leave our clock? If you average the most defensible studies with the cold logic of ecology, a picture emerges. Immediate blast zone deaths were instantaneous. Firestorm and thermal re-entry effects took out a massive fraction of exposed life within hours to days across huge swaths of the planet. The rest depended on geography, body size, and luck. Herbivorous dinosaurs needed plants, and plants needed light. That's the bottleneck that won't bend. In a world where photosynthesis flatlines for months and limps for years, big herbivores don't get second chances. Their predators inherit the problem a little later. If any non-avian dinosaur survived the initial onslaught, their window likely measured in years, not centuries, with a hard ceiling somewhere within a few decades. That's a generous read. It fits the physics, it matches the food web math, and it explains why the fossil record draws such a sharp line at the KPG boundary almost everywhere we look. It also explains who did make it. Crocodilians, turtles, some small birds, small mammals, the coalition of the adaptable. Many could slow their metabolism, hide in water or underground, or eat what was left when the menu vanished. Birds that nested on the ground rather than in the canopy had an edge when forests burned. Mammals that reproduced quickly could rebound as soon as even a trickle of energy returned to the system. In a broken world, speed and flexibility win. People sometimes ask whether volcanism did the job and the asteroid just happened to arrive for the credits. The Deccan traps were already pumping CO2 and sulfur into the air, stressing ecosystems. But the timing is ugly for any narrative that doesn't give the asteroid the starring role. The iridium spike, the global layer of spherules, the tsunami beds, the fern spikes that mark mass forest die-offs. When you stack all those signals, they point to an acute shock layered on top of a chronic illness. The Earth was already coughing. The asteroid finished the job. And what about the sea and the sky? Pterosaurs and mosasaurs tell a parallel story. Massive, specialized, running on food chains that snapped. They vanish right alongside their land-based neighbors. Ammonites, once rulers of the ocean's middle realms, fade out at the boundary, while their more conservative cousins, the nautiloids, hang on. Same theme, different stage. Specialists lose to generalists when the rules change overnight. There's a grim elegance in how it all unfolds. Ecosystems aren't sentimental. They're arithmetic. You can't run a planet on zero light. And once the big herbivores fall below the replacement line, the rest is just timing. But I'll be honest, I like the questions that won't die. Could there have been a valley, a single, tucked-away basin, where a handful of small dinosaurs survived just long enough to see the sky lighten again? Imagine a dwarf hadrosaur population, shrinking in body size over a generation or two under resource pressure. Imagine a lone predator, fasting through long winters and stalking amphibians by the shadow of a logjam. It's a cinematic thought, not a settled fact. Still, the fossil record is lumpy. New quarries rewrite entire chapters all the time. If one unambiguous Paleocene site ever turns up, undisturbed skeletons in life position, eggs in nests, footprints stamped into wet clay above the boundary, then the timeline stretches, even if only a little. Until that day, the best answer is the sobering one. Non-avian dinosaurs end at the boundary. Some may have flickered for years in the dark that followed, and a few optimistic models push that tail to a few decades in protected pockets. But the story doesn't need a million years of coda to be dramatic. The asteroid didn't just destroy, it edited. It erased enough pages from the book of life that the remaining chapters had to be written by different hands. And those new authors? They were small, quick, and hungry. Mammals scaled up over time. Birds diversified into forms that would later own the air. Crocodilians kept their quiet, patient rhythms at the water's edge. The dinosaurs we loved most, the horned ones, the plated ones, the running terrors with sickle claws, bowed out. Their cousins with feathers and beaks kept the brand alive, quietly, efficiently, waiting for the world to brighten. So, how long did the dinosaur survive after the asteroid? Long enough for the planet to prove a point. In a world without sunlight, size and swagger don't matter. Adaptation does. If a true Paleocene dinosaur refuge is out there, stone still holding its secret, it would bend the timeline, but not the lesson. When the sky turns against you, the future belongs to whatever can eat in the dark. And that's the part that should keep us curious. The next spade of dirt could change the length of the epilogue, but it won't change the ending.